Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have a great session lined up for you. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that this session is being recorded and will be made available later this evening. If you have any questions for today's speakers, please drop them in the chat box and they will address them toward the end. I would also like to remind everyone that if you opted in, you should be receiving an email with information about how to apply for CLE credit. There will be 2 codes announced during the program, so please make sure to write those down. Today is brought to you by our great members at Fox Rothschild. The topic today is environmental, social, and governance, what you need to know. Here to provide today's discussion is John Argotowski and David H. Goldman. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for that great introduction. Hi, everyone. We want to get right to what we think is a very interesting and timely topic, and we hope that you do as well. We'd like to thank the IFA for their partnership in helping us to present this program. And we've done a few of these via Fox Rothschild over the past year, including on issues as diverse as bankruptcy and some issues with respect to getting funded, which I know is always a hot topic for franchise systems. ESG is just as interesting. We want to thank everyone for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to my partner, David Colvin, to start us off and give us a little bit more of the background. David is not just a partner at Fox Rothschild, he is the co-chair of the ESG practice group here. So he has a really deep knowledge of that. I'm involved in ESG, and I am also a member of our franchise practice group here at Fox Rothschild. David is not going to be on screen because he's going above and beyond to join us today because he had a little incident with something we'd like to call ice in the Great Northeast this morning and is not feeling particularly well, particularly in his back. But he's a trooper. He's got a little bit of painkillers going on and going to join us for the rest of the show. So, David, turning over to you.
Well, John, thank you for that intro, and thanks to all of you for being here today. I have to say, unlike John, I did not have the foresight to put some salt on my driveway last night, and so I did take a tumble earlier this morning, and I'm currently laid up on the couch with a back that is not so happy. I presented many of these CLEs and webinars in the past, but none from my couch. So this is a first for me. And I do apologize that I'm not face-to-face with you all and appreciate everybody understanding. And I look forward to an opportunity in the future to be face-to-face or even in person with everybody. So with all of that said, let's take a quick look at the agenda. As John said, we have a lot to cover. There's a lot of material that we want to impart, and we hope that you find it helpful and informative. So we're going to start with what ESG is and who the stakeholders are and why ESG matters and why we hope you agree that it matters. John will then take a spin through an ESG profile and the considerations that companies should be thinking about when developing an ESG profile, particularly in the franchise context. And then John will pass the ball back to me. We'll talk a little bit about potential risks and the potential for litigation exposure and some of the trends we're seeing on the litigation front. And then we'll talk a little bit about risk mitigation strategies that any company can deploy to minimize the risk that can arise in the ESG context. So I suspect, having done a number of these and given the audience, that there's probably varying degrees of exposure to ESG among you. I suspect that some of you may be very familiar with ESG, either because you're a student of it or because you apply it in your daily routine at work. And there's others where the concept may be relatively new. So with apologies to any of our ESG honors scholars out there, I do want to take a minute to level set and really go over an ESG primer in terms of what it is and why it matters to serve as a foundation for the discussion we'll have today. For the uninitiated, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. ESG means different things to different people. But what's clear is that from investors to consumers to employees and even to franchisees, financial decisions are being made based on a company's perceived commitment to environmental, social, and governance issues. We see it every day, right? From daily corporate commitments to sustainability and climate impact, like a net zero carbon pledge, for example, to diversity and social justice issues, companies are really facing mounting pressure to change the way they do business. So the way I like to think about ESG at its most basic level is that it's a way of judging a company by factors other than its financial performance. And those factors seek to identify and uncover material risks and opportunities by asking three basic questions. The first is, what are the environmental, social, and governance risks to your company? What are you doing to address those risks, if anything? And really, what are you doing to maximize the chances that your company will be sustainable over the long term? And what we find is the answers to those questions, whether they're published in regulatory filings and other public disclosures, on company websites, in marketing materials, even in social media, wherever you find the answers, those answers can provide invaluable insight into a company's long-term prospects and its overall value proposition. So everyone's probably familiar with the concept of corporate social responsibility. It's been around for decades. And ESG really builds on that concept by providing a framework and data points within that framework that are both measurable and reportable. So at its core, ESG is an investment strategy where investors take into account non-financial factors in the areas of environmental, social, and corporate governance as a supplement to the traditional bottom line financial metrics when they're making investment decisions. And we have to tell you, the results are pretty clear. The research shows, and we'll look at some of the data in a minute, the research shows that companies that proactively identify and address environmental, social, and governance risks and opportunities, they tend to be less risky investments than companies that do not. So taking a step back, who are the stakeholders? Who's the audience that will be making these financial decisions based on an evaluation and the consideration of a company's commitment to ESG? And for the answer to that, we look to Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock. And for those who don't know, BlackRock is the largest money manager in the world. And every year, Larry Fink writes a letter to the CEOs of the companies that BlackRock's clients invest in. And in that letter, Mr. Fink imparts his wisdom in terms of how the CEOs can be better stewards of their companies and how they can deliver better financial gains and performance on behalf of BlackRock's clients. And in 2018, in his annual letter to CEOs, Mr. Fink said something that I think is really relevant. He said, to prosper over time, every company must not only deliver financial performance, but also show how it makes a positive contribution to society. Companies must benefit all of their stakeholders. Now, what's relevant about that is he didn't say companies must benefit all of their shareholders or their stockholders. He said all of their stakeholders. So many really consider that letter from 2018 as sort of the advent of stakeholder capitalism, which looks for long-term value creation for the benefit of all of a corporation's stakeholders and not just its shareholders. So let's take a look at some of the stakeholders that Larry was talking about. We start, because it's an investment strategy at its core, we start with investors. And investors typically fall into one of two camps. You've got your capitalist investors, those who care about ESG factors because those factors can help increase financial performance and generate better financial returns. And then you've got your altruistic investors, those who care about ESG because they positively, the factors, social factors in particular, can positively impact either the environment or advance a social agenda. But one thing both investors agree on, and by the way, they're not mutually exclusive. You can want to do the right thing and still want to make money at the same time. But one thing that all investors seem to be agreeing on, and I shouldn't say all, but most seem to be agreeing on, is that ESG factors are an important measure of long-term financial performance. And they also seem to agree that a company's attention to ESG factors can actually lower investment risk and increase investment returns. And the research trends support the idea that attention to ESG can result in stronger financial performance. In 2020, ESG-focused funds generally outperformed the S&P 500. In a crazy statistic, that came out last year. 90% of millennial investors are committed to making investments that reflect their own values. Now, why does that matter? That matters because millennials, depending on which definition you follow, millennials are anywhere from 25 to 41. So they are right in the sweet spot of their prime earning and spending years. And 90% of them say they're committed to putting their money with companies that reflect their own values.
Hey, David, not to interrupt, but I will.
Go ahead.
I want to point that statistic out for everyone on this webinar. I think it's really important because it's not just 90% of millennial investors are worried about investments that reflect their own values. What I'm sure, is that 90% of millennials, period, are looking for companies that reflect their values. And as David just noted, that's a group of people who are currently 25 to 41. They are rapidly moving into their family formation years, starting their families, making choices as to where they're going to shop, where they're going to eat, where they're going to stay on vacation. And so as we're going through this, while this beginning part of it really focuses on investors because it is an investment strategy, it is important to keep in mind that a lot of these statistics translate out into the people we are targeting as our potential franchisees, our franchisee partners, our customers, and even our employees as we move ahead into the rest of the 2020s in franchising. Sorry, David, but I just wanted to make that point.
No, it's a great point, and it's actually a great segue to the next slide. But before we get there, just one more footnote on the millennial point, which is that the cohort of millennials is now the largest cohort generationally in the world, and certainly in the United States. They've overtaken baby boomers in terms of numbers. And while they're not yet spending at the level that baby boomers spend, they're focusing, as John said, they're focusing their investments. And by investments, I'm using that term loosely, either in the formal sense or in the informal sense in terms of just where they buy goods and services on companies that are going to reflect their own values, or at least those companies they perceive to reflect their own values. I think we have a CLE code coming up, John.
Yes, we have a CLE code coming up.
Go ahead. Yep. So it's
this is CLE code number 1. Please write this down because if you are requesting CLE credit, you will have to turn in these numbers at the email address that was provided with your invitation. This CLE code is 090798. And I'll repeat that one more time, 090798.
Okay, so if we want to flip to the next slide, John, right on cue, John's point. So, it's not just an investment strategy, right? ESG is so much broader than that. Consumers are a key stakeholder group that need to be considered from an ESG perspective under all circumstances. Consumers, like investors, they're increasingly focused on purchasing goods and services from companies that have an ESG profile that aligns with their own values on environmental and social issues. People want to feel good about what they buy, and they want to feel good about where they buy it. So if protecting the environment is your thing, chances are you're going to prioritize buying goods and services from a company that has a demonstrated plan and a solid plan in place to address its environmental impact. And the research bears this out. So in 2018, 48% of consumers said they would change their spending habits to reduce environmental impact. But in just 1 year, up to 2019, that percentage went up by 25%, up to 73%. And last year, this is crazy, 70% of consumers said they would pay a 35% premium for goods or services that were sourced from environmentally friendly brands. So again, the amount of attention being paid by folks who spend money under any circumstance is really geared towards these issues. And again, as John presciently forecasted, employees are another key stakeholder group that every company needs to be thinking about when you're thinking about your ESG profile. Employees, right? They want to focus on working for companies that align with their own values. They want to feel good about where they work, and they want to feel good about the impact that their company, their employer, is having on the communities in which they operate. At this time, maybe more than ever, it's really important to attract and hard to attract and retain top talent, because top talent will benefit, obviously, the company and the brand. And ESG is a relevant consideration for employees when they're looking at their employment prospects. So, are employees provided with fair pay, or even better than fair pay, when compared to a comparable job in the industry? Are they provided with a safe and healthy working environment? Do they have good health benefits and perks? And is the company committed to providing them with financial support for continuing education and training so that they can continue to advance and develop the skills that they need to do their jobs well? So those are just some of the areas around and factors that employees are looking at. And then I would say just the last group in terms of key stakeholders, and they're not even really a stakeholder, but they are relevant to the discussion, are suppliers. So everything we're talking about today in terms of a company's development of ESG policies and procedures, or ESG profile, as I like to call it, it should be equally applicable to any company that operates within the company's supply chain, because it will do you no good to implement ESG related policies if your suppliers and your partners do not. So question to ask, does the company conduct due diligence on the front end when it's partnering with a potential supply chain partner regarding that supplier's commitment to environmental, social, and governance issues? Because if you're not, you really need to be asking those questions. For example, does the supplier adhere to all child labor laws? Does the supplier have sound environmental practices in place? Do all suppliers provide their workers with adequate and safe working conditions? And are they behaving ethically and following the law in the areas in which they operate? But it's not just about asking for reps and warranties on the front end. It's about making sure that your partners are actually complying and doing what they've said that they will do after the agreement is in place. So does the company have the contractual right to conduct audits of its suppliers to make sure that they're actually doing the things that they've repped and warranted that they will do? And if you have that right, are you actually exercising it? Are you actually conducting regular audits of suppliers' compliance, including reps and warranties that reflect ESG factors? And really, the ultimate question is, when it comes to the supplier aspect of things, is has the company done enough to protect itself against the potential operational and really reputational risk that can arise from using a supplier that, for example, is not following child labor laws in the manufacture of goods that you rely upon in your business, which will undoubtedly create significant reputational risk for you. It ain't going to be the supplier that's going to feel the brunt of that. It will be you, and it will be your brand. So those are just some of the factors to consider when we're talking about the stakeholders. So let's talk a little bit now about the factors that these stakeholders will be considering under each of the E, S, and G pillars. None of these lists are exhaustive, and not every factor is going to apply to each company. But we'll just touch on a few, and I'm just watching the clock, so we'll move through these rather quickly. When we talk about environmental, the first thing we're talking about always is climate impact. That is needless to say. How does your company's operations impact the environment, and what policy or plan do you have in place to address that risk, right? But it's not just about how you affect the environment. It's also, how does the environment affect your company, right? How does the fact of climate change affect your ability to operate? And so, for example, do you have operations in areas that are susceptible to wildfires? If so, fine, but then what plan do you have in place to address the risk that you might have an operational issue in the event of a wildfire or during wildfire season? Do you have supply chain partners who operate in areas that are susceptible to hurricanes? If so, fine, but what plan do you have in place to address the risk that those hurricanes could knock out your suppliers for any period of time, and you're going to have to source whatever they're providing you with somewhere else? Has the company made a net zero pledge in terms of carbon? If so, that's fantastic, right? But what really matters is not that you make the pledge. What matters is that you have a plan in place to measure, validate, and report your progress on meeting that pledge. Likewise, like, does the company have a plan in place to reduce its reliance on plastic or to reduce the amount of waste it creates? Again, it's great that the company has something in place to say, yes, we want to reduce our reliance on plastic. But what really matters and what stakeholders are really looking at is, what's your plan? How are you going to get there? And what are you doing to measure, validate, and report your progress? Because that's really where the risk arises when you don't. So in terms of the social pillar, social asks really, how do companies manage their relationships? That's the general question. And the relationships we're typically talking about are employee relationships, customer relationships, and relationships with the communities in which you operate. So does the company have a demonstrated track record of respecting human rights? Does the company have a demonstrated track record of respecting labor rights? Because you can avoid or at least minimize the risk of potentially disruptive strikes. Does the company have a zero tolerance policy for harassment or discrimination of any kind? And in today's day and age, I would expect that every company has that kind of policy, right? We certainly hope so. That's not the point, though. The point is, people behave badly and people will behave badly. The question is, when the situation presents itself, what do you do, right? Do you actually enforce the policy or do you not? That's what people are looking at. That's what they're paying attention to. Look no further than the McDonald's situation with its CEO 2 years ago, right? With what was going on with an employee in violation of company policy. He was terminated, not without providing him with severance, which caused them to get sued for what was believed to be an excessive severance package, which was ultimately recovered. But that's an example where McDonald's did the right thing. They took some blowback for it, but they followed the policy. It's not enough anymore to have a policy on the books. You actually have to follow it. And then lastly, in terms of governance, governance really asks, does the company have a solid track record of good corporate governance and decision-making? Because if it does, that tends to go hand in hand with a successful business and brand. So issues like executive compensation. Are executives paid fairly, but not excessively? Are bonuses tied to factors other than financial performance? So for example, will executives get a better bonus based on customer satisfaction or even employee welfare and happiness? And does the company suspend executive bonuses and compensation if they freeze salaries for their employees? Board diversity obviously is a very important issue. And so does the board of the company reflect the company's commitment to diversity? And then, of course, it goes without saying, does the company comply with the law in the jurisdictions in which it operates? So those are really just a handful of the issues and risk factors that most companies are grappling with from an ESG perspective. So why does it all matter? In my view, this is just sort of the world according to David. For many companies, ESG represents the convergence of doing the right thing and increased profitability. ESG matters because I really think it can increase brand strength. Attention to ESG and ESG factors are really important to long-term financial performance and brand strength. As I said, I think ESG matters because...
Not to interrupt you again, but I will. I think this slide is important for our audience. As we know, the key to any franchise enterprise is the strength of the brand. The strength of the brand attracts investors if you're looking for investors. The strength of the brand attracts good franchisees who want to be part of our system and leverage their financial and other talents in order to grow the brand. And it's also going to want to make customers come and join us. It's going to want to make employees want to work with us because they believe in the brand in the background. So when we talk about these things, I know sometimes there are commentators who want to talk about it in like, well, these are just giving over to liberal causes. And there's some of that, but I think the bigger part of it, as we've been pointing out, is that our market, and especially the market that's coming and reaching their key family years, their key earning years, care about these things, and it's going to stronger brands already recognize this and are moving in this direction. And I'm going to talk about that with some of the profile, but I wanted to make that point here. That's why we put this slide in here, because we know franchising is all about the brand.
Absolutely. I could not have said it better, John. And I think the only point I would add as to why ESG matters is because attention to it, whether it's attention to any of the environmental factors I talked about, or the social factors or the governance factors, proper attention, and it's got to be done properly and it has to be done thoughtfully. But the development of an ESG profile that addresses those factors will minimize the risk that the company and the brand face in the marketplace. It just will. Because if not, you're going to find yourself victim and potentially on the other side of, of a regulatory enforcement action. We'll talk about that in a little bit, or a lawsuit either under a consumer protection statute or by shareholders. It's really important that you don't just say it, right? You need to act it. You need to walk the walk. So if there are others out there who are still unconvinced or who are a little skeptical, last slide before I turn it over to Mr. Gutaski. ESG matters because it can unlock hidden value. So McKinsey did this really great study recently, and according to that study, they concluded that a strong ESG profile really allows a company to grow its top line revenue because it gives it the opportunity and the ability to enter new markets and expand existing markets. They found that a strong profile can reduce operating costs significantly. So one of the knocks on ESG is that it requires the implementation of all this infrastructure for data reporting, and that takes time and it takes investment, and it definitely takes both. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's an upfront and it's a sunk cost, but the rewards on the back end minimize that cost. And they found that, interestingly enough, McKinsey found that companies with the most significant cost savings were the ones that had taken their sustainability efforts the furthest. As I said before, I think a strong ESG profile reduces the risk of adverse regulatory and legal action. And really, a strong ESG profile will help companies attract and retain good and talented employees. And it'll motivate those employees to perform and give them a sense of purpose and engagement, which is what they're looking for in their employer now. And all of that naturally will lead to greater productivity, and the greater productivity will strengthen your brand. So with all of that background, and it's a mouthful for sure, but with that background in mind, let me turn it over to John to talk about some of the specific considerations with respect to developing an ESG profile.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and I just want to build upon for a second about what David was saying, because we thought it was really important to put that McKinsey study here and talk about how this is really a win-win in our opinion. The evidence shows that companies that develop a profile and measure and validate and report on it the way David, the mantra that you've heard David say multiple times, ultimately have higher top line revenue growth, have overall cost reductions even after the outlays for reporting are taken into account. And look, we're all used in the franchise world to reporting, right? There's financial reporting every month. We have suppliers reporting to us. We already do an awful lot of reporting. So putting this into a profile is not particularly difficult. Thinking about, especially for franchisors and vicarious liability and joint employer scares, we're talking about reduced regulatory and legal intervention because we know what's going on and we have a better idea of where the pressure points are and to be concerned. And hopefully we end up with more engaged, productive employees. So talking a little bit more about the considerations, we did split them up into 3 areas: the environmental, social, and governance considerations. They do overlap, but the one thing I'm going to tell you as we go through these, you're going to see yourself in a lot of these slides, because I am convinced that the best operators already do 90 to 95% of these things. They just haven't put it into a profile where they're actually measuring it, validating it, and reporting on it. Some franchisors are doing it already. If you search, especially the ones who are listed on the public markets, they have reports that they're putting out, in part because they're required to, and some because their boards just think it's really important. So you will find you will find them out there, but these are things in your profile to be thinking about. Again, I tried to generalize. Obviously, some of these are going to be more applicable to brick and mortar franchisees. Some will be more applicable to certain industry segments. But I did try and generalize some of the things that when you're developing your profile, at least you want to take into consideration. On the environmental side of things, a really hot thing right now, and we're seeing it throughout our industry, is responsible and our local sourcing of ingredients and furnishings. So instead of getting your furnishings from somewhere halfway around the world, I've seen a number of franchisors recently come to market and redevelop their product, thinking about those millennials, worried about having those people in their restaurants or in their hotels, talking up a big game about how they're locally sourcing not just ingredients, but also furnishings, so that it's not coming from somewhere around the world and you can feel more comfortable about that. And in today's world of supply chain issues and COVID, maybe having some of that local sourcing and responsible sourcing close to home might also help prevent some of the issues I get, like when I go to order on some apps these days of some restaurants, and they tell me that that's not available because our supply chain is too backed up. So one thing to be thinking about on the environmental side, and again, it relates to the bottom line too, because it can be marketed and also maybe prevent some long-term problems. Another really interesting area right now is earth-friendly design. Again, using natural and sustainable building materials rather than things. So as you're thinking about either coming to market with a new brand, or if you're at that point where it's time to refresh the brand, refresh the look of everything, thinking about natural and sustainable products is something that's really important when you're thinking about your ESG profile. Energy efficiency is huge, right? We know this. Because yes, we can switch to a carbon-free grid, but at the same time, we've got to ship all that electricity around, and that still takes building power lines and transporting things long distance. But if we're doing it energy efficiently with the buildings, the lights, and appliances, we're going to be able to cut down on that load. And again, at the end of the day, cutting down on that load up front will mean that we're going to have lower electric bills. And when we're going to market with our concepts, especially if it's a restaurant or hotel concept or something that's heavily bricks and mortars oriented, you're going to be able to tell people the buy-in is going to be less because, yeah, you may have a higher buy-in up front, but your long-term costs are going to be less and you'll get to profitability faster. And we all know that everyone looking at one of our brick and mortar sites, yeah, they want to know what the upfront cost to get in is, but they also want to know, right? They're asking us, when do I get to profitability? With respect to the amount of waste going to landfill, again, it's a win-win. You can cut down the amount of cost of getting that waste out and sending it to other places, and it just reduces the amount of something that needs to be dealt with and takes up the time of franchisees in the system. Recycling, including of cooking oil, perhaps into biofuels. I know a number of our franchised burger chains are moving toward recycling of the cooking oil. Some are doing it into biofuels, some are helping develop it into other purposes. But in the long run, again, they're getting rid of something that right now is a straight cost and it's amount of waste going. A lot of times we've discovered that these things are even taken away for free because they can then be recycled and resold. And a big one, of course, depending on where you are, can be a reduction of water use. Now, I'm in Pittsburgh. I've got 3 rivers all around me. They flow year round. Water's not necessarily a problem here, right? Except that you got to think about every gallon of water that comes into that business also goes back out, and there's a cost associated with that. Sure, there's an environmental cost, but there's also someone has to pay, usually the business, to process all of that water on the back end as well. And it becomes an even bigger issue, as David was saying, if you're in areas that have wildfires or are traditionally dry, especially as the climate in some places appears to be drying out, water costs are going up and will continue to go up. So talk about a little bit from when you're thinking about an ESG profile of some of the social issues out there that are worth considering. David covered a lot of this, but I just wanted to emphasize a couple of key points. Training and education, really important today. We want our franchisees to be ready to handle any type of issues and make sure that they are producing aware and responsive employees. And of course, that starts at home. Franchisors having the right training and education programs that really do produce aware and responsive franchisees who can then go back out and produce aware and responsive employees. And by aware and responsive, we mean they're aware of diversity issues. They're aware of what's going on in the environment, and they're willing to take concerns of customers back to the franchisee, and also making sure that franchisees are bringing that back to the franchisor, so that we look at this again as a partnership that leads to success, as most of the best franchise systems have been over the years. We are worried about a diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment, including an appropriate code of conduct. Look, as David pointed out, there shouldn't be any workplace today, right, that has any issue with respect to diversity, equitable, and inclusive environments. It's the law. We have to apply it. We have to apply it, and we have to make sure we're in compliance. We also know, again, vicarious liability. Properly doing these things can help avoid franchisor vicarious liability, and also perhaps avoid some other types of liability as well. Yes, we protect for it with insurance, which we already do, and we all have that in our franchise agreements and our operating manuals. But we got to make sure that we are building an environment that makes people want to be there in two ways. We want franchisees that are engaged and want to be part of our system. We want them to have employees who are engaged and want to be part of the system. And we want customers to come on that basis as well. And that's why we suggest, and as you're looking through and considering a profile, a code of conduct. It's going to be different for every business. We get that. But when you're thinking about, different types of things that should be in there, it just goes along with what we already do, right? Again, my point is that 99% of this probably is in the operating manual already, but it's probably spread out over 10 pages. This is a way to try and bring it back together and do it in one place at one time, and think about it as a profile that then we can measure, evaluate, validate, and report upon. Next bullet point I have up here is community involvement. All of us are doing community involvement in some way, right? It's great for social media. It gets our franchisees out in the community, building our brand, telling people about what we're doing, whether it's supporting a baseball team or a dog walk or some medical issue, a walk or fundraiser for that. We're all doing that, and it's great for our brand, and it's great that we're doing that. All we're suggesting is, again, thinking about our profile, bring it within the profile and set some level of measurement and that will allow it to be measured, validated, and then you can report upon it to everybody. And then when you're doing your annual meeting or you're doing your annual summary, you can actually put out to everyone, hey, this is what our franchisees did. This is what corporate did. These are the causes we've supported. Look at the great stuff that we've done together. And then we'll have this in one place and we can report it out. And then if we're thinking about selling to a venture capital or private equity group, we also have that data right there that we can spread. The last one I have up here is safety for all. Obviously, we want safe environments, but particularly I put this on here because, as we know, this has been a very hot button issue for the hotel segment. The truth of the matter is that unfortunately, hotels are used for human trafficking, both around the world and in the United States. Most of our franchisors are great at this, training and awareness of both franchisees and their employees regarding human trafficking, the signs to look for, the issues to be worried about, and making sure that we're taking care of that. All we're saying is when you're bringing it in within the ESG profile, have a measurement to make sure that you're measuring that training and awareness availability, that you're tracking what has been reported and what steps are being taken so it can be reported. And from my perspective, I'm not going to name any names, but there's one hotel, large hotel franchisor out there who's doing a fantastic job. So I will name them. It's Marriott. They've been doing a fantastic job. We don't represent Marriott, so no personal issue there. But they've been doing a great job if you look at their annual ESG report of how they've been tracking this, how they've been tracking how many people are trained, from franchisees to employees, to what they've been able to uncover and report to law enforcement and other organizations, and the human trafficking they've been able to disrupt. And now that they've got it reported and validated and measured, you know what else they're doing? They're marketing it. And I've seen ads in a number of different places where they're going out and telling people, look what we're doing. This is really important to us, and we'd like you to be part of it if you like these issues. So when it gets to the governance considerations, there are a number of different governance considerations that we suggest that you consider. A lot of these, again, you're going to see yourself here: internal compliance controls, integrity and ethical standards for yourselves, for your franchisees, your franchisees have them for its employees and for all of your suppliers. You make sure that those integrity and ethical standards are written down, they sign on to them, and then you have a reporting system to make sure that they're complied with. Not just, as David said, in the covenants, but actual auditing to make sure it's being timed. You set up internal team hotlines for reporting violations so that franchisees and their employees can report things anonymously and tell everyone what's going on, and then you as the franchisor can investigate them. We all have social media policies, making sure we have them that are appropriate and that deal with things like diversity and integrity and equity issues. That's also really important. Obviously, David mentioned the unfortunate McDonald's situation. Non-fraternization policies are really important, especially when you have, as many of us do, area reps who go out to the franchisees on a regular basis and are evaluating things and looking through everything. Again, having them written down, having them backed up is really important. Conflict of interest policies, no kickbacks. And again, if there are situations where certain suppliers do provide financial incentives back to the franchisor, disclosing it. We all know that most of us disclose that. Most states that have requirements also require those disclosures, but just make sure that it's written down and that it's out there so that everyone knows about it. And it, again, can be measured, evaluated, and reported upon. For the companies that are public, and insider trading policy is a very important thing to have, especially right now when the government's taking a very hard look at insider trading. And because last year there were a number of companies that suddenly, insiders who sold off massive amounts of stock as they're getting to the end of the year. And then having written and controls on lobbying and political contribution policies. Again, not taking a position as to whether or not you should or shouldn't be lobbying or making political contributions to any particular party or any particular person out there, but making sure you've got the policies written down and that they're being followed so that everyone is transparent and understands what's happening. A few more governance considerations. This is obvious. Audited financials are really important, especially when you're going to market. We all know you have to have audited financials available. Sometimes you don't because you're new, but that's an important one. Getting to that point, again, from a ESG perspective is important. Cybersecurity concerns fall under governance. Making sure that you've got the right type of security, that you've got the right type of insurance, and most importantly, that you've got the right way of reporting it out. Because you never get in trouble with consumers or really even the government that often if you have a cybersecurity breakdown that's quickly controlled and you go out to the public and say, mea culpa, it was a mistake, and here's what's happened, and here's how we're going to fix it. What happens is when it's not reported, and then 12 months down the line, the news media gets a hold of it and says, well, this company's security was breached, and all of this consumer's credit card information and address information has been turned over, and it's probably being used on the dark web. People hear dark web, they hear social security numbers, they hear credit card numbers, and they freak out. I can tell you from having worked on a major breach at one company. So what you want to make sure is, again, you're measuring it and that you're ready when you have to be able to be transparent about what happened. And then the last thing here that we recommend is making sure you have in some form or another a franchise advisory council, that you give your franchisees the opportunity to have representatives who meet and discuss their concerns and report up to the franchisor as to what those issues are. I'm not going to pretend that sometimes those conversations can't sometimes be difficult. People have concerns about what happens. But what the statistics show time and time again, including statistics from the IFA, is that franchise systems with franchise advisory councils grow faster, have overall happier franchisees, and have better brand equity. It's a consistent thing across the board. And again, it's not just a nice thing to have, it's really talking about your bottom line. We have the next CLE credit here, and I will read that off, the number, before I turn it back over to David. The number is 050963. And let me repeat that one more time. 050963. David, back to you.
Thank you, John. And there was a lot of good stuff in those slides and in the information you imparted. So let's talk just a little bit. We have looks like about 15 minutes left, or a little less. Let's talk a little bit about potential risks and exposure that can arise from even the most well-intentioned ESG profile. So, with the explosion of publicly available information, and frankly, companies scrambling to make ESG-related disclosures, ESG-related litigation is undoubtedly on the rise. We're finding that, shall we say, enterprising lawyers are using the increase in disclosures, both in numbers and in content, to manufacture and file costly lawsuits. And so the cases that we're seeing typically fall into one of three buckets. Consumer claims that are filed under any number of consumer protection laws, shareholder claims filed under the U.S. securities laws, and then government and regulatory enforcement actions. So looking first at consumer claims, all 50 states have consumer protection laws, but New York and California's consumer protection laws tend to be the most frequently invoked, regardless of where the claim is filed, because they're the most plaintiff-friendly, and they provide for attorney fees to the prevailing plaintiff. In California, just a note, a prevailing defendant, that meaning a defendant who wins, can recover its fees only upon a finding that the plaintiff's action was not filed in good faith. So it's not automatic in California that a defendant, if victorious, would recover its fees. And consumer protection claims, they typically come in a variety of flavors. So, for example, claims arising from statements on products, product labels, product packaging. You said on your label that the packaging is 100% recyclable, and it isn't. And I wouldn't have bought your product had I known the truth, so pay me. You said on your product label that the product is biodegradable, and it isn't. So had I known that, I wouldn't have bought it, pay me. All these examples come from real life cases, by the way. Another flavor of consumer protection claim are omissions, or things that are not said either in connection with a product label or on a product website or packaging. So, you didn't disclose on your label that your product was produced in violation of child labor laws. That's a real case. And had I known that some unfortunate 7-year-old in some faraway land was the one who manufactured that product, I wouldn't have bought it. Or you didn't disclose that animals were mistreated in the production of your product. So, and it's not just product labeling, that can sustain or serve as the basis of a consumer claim. Any ESG related statement that you make, whether it's on your website or in an annual report or even in your social media feeds, those statements, to the extent consumers are relying upon them in connection with their purchasing decisions, they can serve as the basis of a claim. So when thinking about the risks that can arise from the statements you make in connection with ESG, a good general rule of thumb is that aspirational and forward-looking statements, so use environmental examples because they tend to be the easiest. So, for example, we hope to reduce our environmental impact by X%, or we hope to be carbon neutral by X year. Those types of aspirational statements tend to be safer than specific declaratory statements that the company will be, in fact, carbon neutral by X year, or we will reduce our carbon or our environmental impact by X%. The use of the word hope provides some intentionality, but it's not specifically declarative enough, typically, to form the basis of a claim. Not in all cases, and we'll get to that in a minute. So greenwashing is one thing I wanted to touch on in connection with environmental statements. So look, I see this every day. I'm guessing many of you do too, whether you're the franchisor, whether you're a franchisee, or whether you're somewhere else in the system. Companies are under a huge amount of pressure right now to be saying something publicly about their environmental impact. They're seeing their competitors do it. They're seeing just others in the industry do it. and they're feeling the pinch that they need to be saying something too. So often they leap without thinking in terms of they make the statement, but they weren't really prepared to, as we've been saying, measure, validate, and report on it. They just want to sort of go along to get along and make the statement that they have the right intentions and they want to make the right changes and they want to reduce their impact in this way or that way. And greenwashing is the concept that it's where you make those statements about being, environmentally friendly, where in fact your services or your impact is not as environmentally friendly as claimed, or not at all. So claims premised on greenwashing are really increasing dramatically. Actually, they tend to be the largest bucket that we're seeing in terms of claims that are filed. So what can you do to reduce the risk of a greenwashing claim? First and foremost, it helps if you provide evidence that whatever product or service or whatever statement you're making about impact on the environment, if you provide some evidence, don't just say it, show it, is really the message there. Clearly define your environmental claims with the hope that you can avoid consumer confusion. This happens more than you would think. Don't make claims about independent certification or verification about your climate impact unless you actually have an independent evaluator providing you with that verification, or if they're not true. We've seen cases where folks are saying they've been independently certified as XYZ in terms of the environmental impact that their products and services have, and there's actually no such independent company that's certified. Or they're saying they're certified even though the independent evaluator found that it wasn't quite so. So what's the message there? Be truthful, right? Just a lot of this is be truthful, but it's not enough that you're truthful. Always be truthful, but that's not enough, right? There's got to be more. There's got to be more behind the truthful statement. There has to be the process in place so that you can inform and advise your stakeholders, whoever they are, that you're taking the steps necessary to meet your goals as represented to them in whatever form. A quick case example that this gets filed under the heading of no good deed goes unpunished. Everybody knows Ben & Jerry's, it's delicious. And obviously Ben & Jerry's as a company is well known for its philanthropic efforts and its commitment primarily to environmental and social justice issues. But that being the case, Ben & Jerry's claimed on its website that it was sourcing milk from quote unquote happy cows as part of its quote unquote caring dairy program. And it was really a good program. It was a program where Ben & Jerry's they were helping their dairy farmers produce milk in what can only be described as a cow-friendly way, in a way that was humane and not inhumane. Consumers, being the enterprising folks that they are, they allege that with respect to certain cows who Ben & Jerry's sourced milk from, that those cows were mistreated in an inhumane way. So they made an allegation, we wouldn't have bought the ice cream had we known. We don't think the cows are actually happy. And it's not a caring dairy program, because how could you care if in fact you're treating the animals inhumanely? So the court ultimately sided with Ben & Jerry's, finding that no reasonable consumer could show that he purchased the ice cream just because of the statements about how Ben & Jerry's sourced the milk. And the court also ruled that the statement happy cows was a non-actionable statement of opinion, since no one really knows and no one can really verify if said cows were in fact unhappy. Needless to say, and I know I'm making a little bit of light of the case, I'm sure Ben & Jerry's didn't find the case very funny. And the case goes to show that no company, no matter how well intentioned, is beyond the reach of ESG-based consumer claims. In another example, over the summer, Coca-Cola was sued in state court in the District of Columbia, in which the plaintiff, which is Earth Island Institute, seeks declaratory and injunctive relief related to statements that Coca-Cola has made publicly. Coca-Cola removed the case to federal court. In the complaint, the plaintiff alleges that Coke advertises itself as an environmentally friendly company, when according to plaintiff, Coca-Cola is one of the largest contributors to plastic pollution in the world. So specifically, plaintiff's complaint takes aim at certain aspirational statements by Coke. And I know I said before that aspirational statements are as a general rule of thumb, are generally pretty safe. So consider this the exception to the rule. But with respect, the aspirational statements are in the slide. We're using our leadership to achieve positive change in the world. Part of our sustainability plan is to help collect and recycle a bottle or can for everyone we sell globally by 2030. These are good things. But the plaintiff contends in that case that those statements are false and misleading, given what they perceive or understand to be Coca-Cola's track record with respect to plastics and plastic pollution arising from their operations. The parties are actually litigating right now in terms of whether the case will move forward in federal or state court, so nothing substantive to report in terms of how the court has ruled on those claims. But this case goes to show that even aspirational statements about a company's intentions to have a positive environmental impact or a positive social impact are fair game from a consumer protection standpoint. Just quickly on the government and regulatory front, there's a lot happening. So in March of last year, many of you may know, the SEC announced the creation of a climate and ESG task force that lives within the Division of Enforcement at the SEC. And the purpose of the task force is to look for misstatements and material gaps in publicly traded companies' climate-related disclosures. And although the task force is presently focused on just climate, they will no doubt expand their net and start looking at other ESG related disclosures in the context of social or governance disclosures in the months and years ahead. The thing to note there is that they are enforcing. They're finding material gaps in statements that companies are making, again, because they're leaping before looking, and they're saying things before they actually have the ability to measure, validate, and report, and the SEC is calling them on it. So that's one risk to be aware of in terms of for any of our public companies on the line. The SEC is also expected to announce new climate-related standards for disclosures in the early part of this year. One of the issues that companies are facing as it relates to public disclosures is there's no standard. So it's a little bit of the Wild West in terms of what companies are disclosing, what they need to disclose, how much is good enough, and what are the various data points that have to be disclosed. And so, as I said, it's a little bit of the Wild West. It's expected that the standards that the SEC is going to announce will bring some sanity, and obviously will standardize that process, but that's not necessarily going to help. Not all companies are the same, right? So is a standard set of disclosures going to work if, depending on the type of company we're talking about, whether its size and its impact, is a standard set of disclosures going to work for every company? Probably not. In addition, it's expected that these new rules will be very burdensome and very onerous. Now, I know John mentioned in the franchise world, y'all are very, very familiar with data reporting up and down the chain, and that's a good thing. I expect that you're going to get more data reporting in your life based on these standards that will be announced by the SEC. But they will be onerous, they will be costly, and they will require an infrastructure to be developed so that the data can be reported. And then last but not least, I'll just touch on something we haven't touched on really a lot, which is very important and prevalent, particularly after the last year we had, diversity. So in August, the SEC approved a new NASDAQ rule on board diversity. So, and I think this is a harbinger of what you can expect to see on other exchanges going forward. The rule will require at least 2 diverse board members on NASDAQ traded companies' boards, one who self-identifies as female, one who self-identifies as either an underrepresented minority or LGBTQ. By 2023, you got to have 1 diverse board member on the NASDAQ, and by 2025, you got to have 2. Again, I think that's yep.
We're just about out of time, but we do have one question.
Go ahead.
And Amanda Hart asked, when launching an ESG program, what should be the very first step?
So that's great. John, you want to flip to the last slide?
Yes. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
There we go.
So in my view, there you go. in my view, the first step would be a materiality assessment. As John said, most companies are doing most of these things. They're just doing them in a disparate and siloed way that's not harmonized under an ESG umbrella. And what's important about doing a materiality assessment is you'll identify what you're doing, good, and you'll identify where the gaps are and where you could improve, also good. And it gives you an opportunity to bring the stakeholders within the enterprise together. Who do I mean? Legal should be part of that. Human resources should be part of that. IT should be part of that. Environmental safety, health and safety, to the extent you have such a department, should be part of that. And really identify what's material, because what's material to each company is going to depend on the company, right? Not every risk applies to every company. So from my perspective, the first thing to do is to do a materiality assessment. There are any number of frameworks available publicly and free of charge to identify that list by industry the types of issues and the types of factors that you should be considering. And I think that's a good first step, because the good thing is, while this is an overwhelming concept to many, because it's just a lot of information and it presents, I think, a really difficult, it's difficult to have to aggregate all of this data in such a way. But I think if you do the materiality assessment, you find that, okay, we are doing a lot of this stuff. Now, what can we do to do it better, and where can we find the gaps to make sure that we're not leaving anything uncovered? So that would be my number one starting point. But I do want to just close with, above all else, as we've said, if you're making statements out there on ESG topics, regardless of the form in which you're doing it, be truthful. Always be truthful. Always be truthful. But don't just say it. You got to do it. You have to have a plan in place to measure it, to validate it, and report it, because your stakeholders are expecting that. They're not just expecting to hear you say the right things anymore. They're actually expecting to see action. And that's the piece where I think we can help companies get over the hump. So listen, it's been a pleasure. John, as always, it's good to be with you. And I appreciate very much the opportunity to spend an hour with y'all.
Thank you, David, and thank you to our audience. We appreciate your attention and participation. David and I are both available to discuss any of these topics in any greater detail that you'd like to. We're at Fox Rothschild. We're on the web. You can find us pretty quickly. So thank you to everyone who participated. Thank you for a few of the comments and questions. And I really do appreciate and thank Lauren as well from the IFA.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was wonderful content, wonderful feedback from all of you. Again, this webinar was recorded, and along with the presentation deck can be found later this evening on community.franchise.org. Thank you so much again to John and David, and thank you to the rest of the Fox Rothschild team. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day and stay safe and healthy.